Good afternoon. As chair of the advisory committee of the Lorraine Beitler Dreyfus collection of the Van Pelt Library, I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming you to our annual Beitler lecture, and in particular of extending a very warm welcome to our distinguished speaker this year, Isaac Dovere? Dovere. Okay. As most, and probably all of you know, the Beitler collection was assembled over many years by Dr. Lorraine Beitler with the assistance of her husband, the late Marty Beitler, and was gifted to Penn, where it has been curated by Lorraine. This remarkable and growing collection, by the way, because pieces are being added to it regularly, is available to scholars for research purposes and also to educators who are using it. And there are a number of both college and high school teachers who are using the material from the Dreyfus collection, using it to show students how democratic institutions such as a free press and the legal system properly used can overcome prejudice, racism, anti-Semitism, and official malfeasance. Now, if you have not already investigated the collection's website, where a large body of the Beitler collection material is actually available online, then this is your homework for the coming week. I'm retired now, but once a professor, always a professor, so please jot this down in your homework book. Now let me introduce to you one of our founding committee members, Ann Lebowitz, who has played a central role in organizing today's event. Ann is a former prosecutor and now a practicing attorney, and she is tireless in her efforts to promote the work of the Beitler collection. And for this and for many other things, the committee members, myself included, are immensely grateful to her. So it's fitting that Ann will introduce today's distinguished speaker, whose very relevant topic is the politics of paranoia and nationalism in the age of Trump. But you knew that.
It is truly my great pleasure to introduce today's Beitler Distinguished Lecturer, EdwardIsaac Dovere, who I think most people know as Isaac. Is that right? Mr. Dovere is a distinguished journalist. He is currently a staff writer for The Atlantic. He was for 7 years the chief White House correspondent for Politico and the host of a podcast, Off Message. He has received awards from the Washington Correspondents Association, the New York Press Club, and the Society of Professional Journalists. And we are very pleased to have him here today. So I think they'll be able to see you.
We'll say at least I have the height, and now we'll see if what I have to say from it will be interesting. Well, thank you, Ann, and thank you to Lance and the Beitler collection for having me here tonight. I am going to leave time at the end for questions, which I'm really looking forward to, and maybe we'll just talk about the Mueller report and what we all think might be in it or might not. I have no idea, just to be clear. But I'll start by just laying out some thoughts on where we are and where we're headed, and hope to make clear the connections to the Dreyfus Affair and to the collection that led to my invitation here tonight. I guess I should note to start that back when I was applying to colleges, I got rejected from Penn. And then, like any good liberal arts graduate and journalist, I applied to law school. Of course, I got rejected from Penn again. But here I am. Let me give you a sense of me and how I'm coming at all these issues that are ahead of us. Starting with Obama's re-election in 2012 and through his second term, I covered him day in and day out at the White House. I covered the 2016 election from that perspective. So I was on the campaign trail with Obama, not with any of the candidates so much, although I did a little bit out with each of them. And what I was able to see through that is over the course of the year, how he was making the case and how the case was being received through those final days, including the last rally he did for Hillary Clinton down by Independence Hall the night before the election. I was there for that, trying to see how he thought what was going on in the country differed from what was going on in the country, and how he was trying to process that, and people in the White House trying to process that. I was there the night of the election at the Clinton party, such as it was in New York, expecting things to go one way, as I think most of us all. And then as soon as it was clear things were going the other way, I left in the middle of the night to go back to D.C. As I got in a cab leaving the Javits Center in New York, where the Clinton party was, I was emailing people who worked for Obama in the White House, and the subject line of the email was, "Do you have a plan?" There was nothing else in the email. One email came back to me that just said, "Nope." And that's when I realized exactly what we were about to go through. But I was in the Rose Garden at the White House the next morning when Obama spoke. And then 2 days later, was one of the handful of reporters in the Oval Office when Trump came to see Obama, which was actually the first time that they'd ever met in person. I don't know if people know that. The first time that they ever talked was when Obama called him to congratulate him on being elected president. So these two just massive characters that, with the opposition between them have defined our lives, have barely ever talked. They have not talked since Obama left the inauguration, except for a brief greeting at George H.W. Bush's funeral. So this division that we have in the country is actually sort of captured by how things are for them personally. For the next 2 years, I came off the daily White House coverage to focus on how politics was shifting as a result of what had happened in the presidential election. And that morphed over time into where I am now, which is covering the Democratic presidential field. I'm not on one candidate or a couple. I'm on the field, so that's only 18 to keep track of. Now maybe I should check my phone, which I left charging, to see if any more announced since I started speaking. I will tell you that if I were giving this lecture a week from now, the number will be more than 18. I know that for sure. And I come at this election now from spending a lot of time out on the campaign trail, more than I know than my wife and children would prefer, out in Iowa and New Hampshire and all sorts of places in between. I have already, though there are 18 of them, I have interviewed every one of the candidates running and seen them all out and about on the trail, and at least someplace, from shaking hands to giving speeches, and how people are reacting to them and what's coming up in their discussions. So that's where I come at this from. But as for you, before I get any further, let's do this. Let's take a minute and think about what happens if Donald Trump is reelected. You can close your eyes if you need to, or don't. Maybe some of you really want him to get a second term, and maybe I'm giving you some of you heart attacks or heartburn by just bringing it up. But it is a very real possibility. As someone who worked on Hillary Clinton's campaign said to me, and has actually said it to me over and over again, it's at least somewhat more likely that he'll win in 2020, and more believable that he'll win in 2020 than it was that he would win in 2016, and he did. So what happens then if Donald Trump is a two-term president? It will change a lot of things. Whenever there's a one-term presidency, it's about sort of setting things in motion, and two terms is when you can set things in place. And you see that for any of the two-term presidencies. It was very important from Obama's standpoint, for example, that he win a second term to put in place and lock in place a lot of things that he had done in his first term, particularly around Obamacare. Of course, part of what he thought was important about Hillary Clinton winning was that he thought if then there was one more term, then that would have locked in place even more. And as we can see, that didn't happen. And much of what Donald Trump has been doing over these last couple of years is just undoing the Obama presidency. But beyond the way the government functions, which is, of course, a very big topic, let's just think about politics and how American politics will change. There will be, again, changes to Obamacare will probably be gone. The judiciary will continue to be transformed. The Supreme Court will likely move to a place where Roe v. Wade is like the easiest thing to see would get overturned. We won't rejoin the Paris Climate Accords. I said to a top Democrat a couple of weeks ago, no pressure, but if you guys don't figure out how to organize in Michigan in a way that is more effective, it's pretty simple. We're going to pull out of NATO, right? Like if Donald Trump is reelected, that's where this is headed. These are big changes, but again, about politics. How what he has done to politics has deep, deep effects. And I would say to you that you've probably heard politicians say over and over again, pretty much every time, this is the most important election of our lifetimes. Well, this time it's true. It may be the most consequential presidential election ever in terms of shaping the direction of the future of the country and the world. 1860, obviously a big one. And I don't think that there's another civil war coming for all of our divisions. But the world in 1860 wasn't as interconnected then. And the United States didn't matter as much as a force within it. And there weren't as many ledges being run up against as there are now. In the next decade, we're going to face no turning back situations with floods and fires and droughts from the very health of the earth changing. The war in Syria alone has created a rippling refugee emergency in Europe, much as problems at home in Central America and Mexico have turned our southern border into the most divisive issue that we face. We're somewhere in the middle of the biggest shift in jobs in the economy, at least since the Industrial Revolution, and probably by the time it's done, much more significant than that. And we've only begun to wrap our heads around what better technology and automation means, not just for what we produce, but for the millions of people per year who are going to start finding out that there's a robot or a software program that can do their work better, cheaper, faster, and without needing to take breaks to eat or sleep. So the decisions that we make in the next few years will define us for decades, and probably a century. Realistically, it could ripple through human history. We're talking about defining the shape of our society, the role of our government, the shape of global alliances, the health of the planet. But that is not, I would guess, what we're going to hear most about, at least from the president. And no one has proven as adept as the president in shaping what you're going to hear from him and from everyone else responding to him. So what are you going to hear about? Immigrants, Muslims, terrorists, socialism. We'll hear about the Democrats being soft on crime and that they don't love America, that the media is fake news, the enemy of the people. We'll probably hear more about the deep state and a witch hunt. I should say it's not just what we'll hear out of Donald Trump. This is pervasive across politics. From a lot of Democrats, we're going to hear things that are influenced by the way the conversation has already shifted. We'll hear about Russia and suspicions of payoffs and sellouts, things that must be true, even if they're not in the Mueller report or anywhere else, or there's any proof to say that they are true. And let me let you in on a little secret that none of us wants to admit. We're going to fall for it. I think the best way to do this is to talk about how it's playing out already. So let me take you to a recent day on the campaign trail. It was April 5th, just 2 weeks ago. Obviously, all sorts of things happened since, but let's focus on that. It was a Friday, and I was in New York actually on my way to New Hampshire later that day. And the first big event of the year that all the Democratic candidates showed up at, in politics, the word for this is a cattle call, though I realized I was saying this to a friend of mine, and he thought it was ridiculous, and it's the first time that I actually thought of how weird that sounds, that we call it a cattle call when all the candidates show up. But it was in New York at the National Action Network Conference. It's the group that's run by Al Sharpton, and they were there to talk about their campaigns, and particularly their thoughts on race and racial justice, and all those things which are obviously very crucial and central issues for Democrats. And it was Kamala Harris and John Hickenlooper and Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and Amy Klobuchar, Kirsten Gillibrand, Cory Booker, probably left some of those out. Earlier in the week, Beto O'Rourke had been there, and John Delaney and Julian Castro and Pete Buttigieg. Warren told this moving story about her own struggles and wove it into about her positions on on childcare and how her own experiences had influenced what she thought about childcare, and talked about how she wanted to create a universal childcare situation that would be paid for in part by the 2% tax on the ultra-rich that she's proposed. Harris talked about increasing teacher pay and doubling the size of the Civil Rights Department of the Justice Department, or Civil Rights Division, I'm sorry, to do more to challenge civil rights problems and state-level discriminatory voting laws. Most of that has been left not being done by the Justice Department over the last couple of years. Cory Booker talked about the morality of a nation that allows poverty to exist and what he'd do about it. But that wasn't what the attention was on. What the attention was on that day was Joe Biden on the Democratic side. He was finishing off a week when he'd been under fire for touching people, questions about whether the touching was okay. And he was telling jokes about it, and the jokes became what people were focused on. But where was President Trump while this was all going on? Well, he'd flown to California to go to the border with Mexico and look at what he called the beginning of his border wall and get presented with a plaque. Should say that the border wall, it was not the beginning of his border wall, it was something that was there otherwise. But as he flew there, a few hours before, the night before, he'd posted a video making fun of Biden for touching people. But this was the real show down at the border. It's been the real show since the first day of the campaign in June 2015, when he rode down that escalator in Trump Tower and declared that Mexican immigrants were rapists, and we all thought then that the biggest consequences of it were going to be that The Apprentice was dropped by NBC. Almost 3 years later, he stood there in California and he said, "We don't have room. That means you can't take them." And he said, "I don't think that anyone has ever expressed it like that, but I'm expressing it like that. When it's full, it's full." And again, it was a show, and don't take my word for it. Here's the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security talking to Chris Cuomo on CNN that night. Why was he there? It's an optic. To have the president stand in front of the wall indicates immediately to any viewer that he's at the border. And 2 days later, of course, as Kristen Nielsen, she resigned, seemingly because she wasn't going to go along with any more of this. And what we found out was that it was related to Trump's decision to start separating families again, which Nielsen, had half-heartedly defended back in June of last year when that first came out. That was the point, to make everybody think about the border wall, about the people coming over it. Not to think about the issues of racial justice or economic justice or anything else, so not to think about what we should actually do at the border, but to get people scared. Now again, this is something that has pervaded all of our politics, and so let me just tell you about what was going on then as Democrats started to process it. There was a video that made its way around on Twitter of the president sitting in the Oval Office, and he was calling people animals, and there was horror among Democrats because he had called asylum seekers animals. People say, can you believe that he said that? What? He's so terrible. But you know what? It wasn't true, actually. He had not called asylum seekers animals. It was an old clip. He had called the members of the gang MS-13 animals, which you can take issue with itself. But it's different from calling asylum seekers animals. But because we're all in this mix of paranoia and stress about what's going on, it just took on a life of its own. And I said a few minutes ago that we were all going to fall for it. I fell for it. I was in New Hampshire by Saturday night of that weekend at a house party that Cory Booker was doing, and I saw it come across quickly, and I asked Cory Booker what he thought of that. And Booker, well, he said, I'll take your word for it that that's what he said, and he responded in this very calm way, to his credit. Good thing for me. I at least checked it out before I published anything, and nothing appeared. But that wasn't an option that Booker had, and he had to try to respond to this fervor of paranoia without any chance to think about it or get it wrong. There were cameras on him. There were iPhones on him. And whatever he had said, if he had responded in a more intense way, could have taken on a life of its own. And that, again, unfortunately, is because of me. So it's paranoia all around. Just take another Friday, last Friday. After spending the previous few days stepping up mentions of people who were interested in the findings of the Mueller report and saying that they were treasonous, and how the Democrats who wouldn't do what he wanted in closing down the border were committing treason. And let me remind you that treason is a crime with a very clear definition in the Constitution. It's punishable by death. But President Trump responded to a report that was in the Washington Post that seemed unbelievable when it ran, that he wanted to dump detained asylum seekers from the southern border into the congressional districts of his political opponents. Well, this was a report that the White House had denied when the Washington Post reached out about it, said it wasn't true. Well, President Trump then said it actually is true, and this is what he wants to do. It is not likely the case that he is going to do this, but he wants us all to think that he is going to do it. This is where the politics of it are, so that everybody gets spun up about it, that there is the people who don't want the immigrants to be there or the asylum seekers to be there to say that they're happy with what Trump is doing, and to then have the people who are opposed to these changes and to this idea and think it's terrible to get all spun up in reaction to it. This is not happenstance. It's not mistakes. It's what we see happening all over all the time. That same day, a report came out that the president had told the person who was in charge of border control, and by the way, that person is now the acting Secretary of Homeland Security because Nielsen quit. Well, he told that person to go ahead and break the law in terms of denying asylum, and that if he was brought to court, that he could count on the president to pardon him. This, again, was not something that came about because this was a fully thought-out plan, but as a way of throwing more anxiety into the system. And then to close up the day, Friday evening, it was around 8 o'clock he tweeted a video that took a moment from Minnesota Congresswoman Ilhan Omar out of context, and she was talking about the September 11th attacks and how there had been discrimination against Muslims overall because of what some terrorists had done. And the president tweeted a video that played that against footage of the Twin Towers exploding. I don't want to get into the questions about Omar's other comments about AIPAC that have made her such a lightning rod, or Trump's own comments on September 11th itself, when he was doing an interview talking about how, with the attack and the destruction of the buildings, he now owned the tallest buildings in New York. This is focused on the video that he tweeted, which had a very clear intention. He could be talking about the regulations that he's cut, or the tax bill that went through, tax day, just a few days after he tweeted the video, or how he's shaken up the international order, or the new trade deal that his team has negotiated that would replace NAFTA. Now, the president is preparing to run for re-election by saying that the Democrats are socialists, that they're about letting unchecked immigrants in to take over the country, that they've abandoned what the country really was. And perfect for him, here are 3 first-term congresswomen who have all become media sensations. They are friends and political allies in reality. But they sort of knit this message together, and it's led by Omar, a Somali-born refugee who has been enmeshed in the rhetoric of the far left, Rashida Tlaib, who is a Palestinian-American from outside Detroit, who eagerly wants to be an organizer for the left and inside the House, and has gotten herself into some trouble pushing forward on impeachment talk. And then, of course, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the freshman congresswoman from New York, who's of Puerto Rican descent, and she has already succeeded in turning what is, if you read it, a whole group of ideas that are not actual policies that are called the Green New Deal into a litmus test that the presidential candidates all feel like they have to essentially endorse, even though they all say, well, I don't really know that we should bring it into law, or I don't know if I agree with everything in it, but they all say, yes, I'm for it. And they have become central figures in Donald Trump's telling of what's going on in the Democratic Party. But when he tweeted about Omar, again, let's look at what happened that night. Almost all the 2020 candidates and a number of other Democratic leaders leapt to Omar's defense. And maybe you think they should have. Maybe you think they shouldn't have. But here's the point. Donald Trump decided the music, and everyone else danced to it. I was, just earlier today, in a text message conversation with somebody who's working on one of the presidential campaigns, who looked back on that and said, I can't believe we all did it. But in the heat of the moment, that's where it all goes. There was a New York Times article over the weekend which quoted a well-known Democratic pollster named Celinda Lake. And she, and this is what it says, as she has surveyed likely 2020 swing voters, she was surprised to hear people in focus groups repeat false assertions made by the president and his allies. So the point of that was that that they are seeing things and hearing things come up from people that are not true, that nobody other than President Trump and his political supporters are saying, but that they are assuming that that's just the way it is. They're saying it's fact now. The paranoia has seeped into our whole understanding of things. And that's, by the way, not just Republican voters. These are not just the people who think that Donald Trump is the best thing that ever happened. For everybody, and the swing voters in swing states, the people who are going to likely decide who the next president is. So, where does this leave us? What's this campaign going to be like? Well, I would say by October of 2020, you're going to think all the stuff that I was just talking about seems tame. And no one knows what to do about it. This collection is, of course, all about the Dreyfus Affair, and I'm not an expert on that. I got my master's degree in intellectual history. That's about as close as I came. But I wrote a thesis about Benjamin Franklin and Henry David Thoreau, so it's pretty far afield. I'll leave to Lance and everyone else here to get in depth on the questions about the Dreyfus Affair. But here's what I know. Everything that went down then was at the time of major national turmoil in France, when the country was changing and the world was changing and everyone was scared of the changes. And human beings scared of change have a pretty consistent record over the globe and over the centuries in responding in pretty much the same way. Well, as I said, the world has never been changing this much or this quickly. And though we can look at the math and say that the changes that are happening are going to happen no matter what we do, that the world isn't going to become less interconnected, less technologically dependent, or more male-dominated, or more dominated by white people of traditional European descent. There are people who don't like Trump or his kind of politics who would call this a last gasp, a final backlash. Well, maybe. Here's how Barack Obama put it, talking about Trump and about what a contrast Trump is to the kind of multinational, multi-ethnic vision of America and the world that he represented. He said, "I'm pretty confident that the overwhelming majority of Americans are looking for the kind of politics that does feed our hopes and not our fears, that does work together and doesn't try to divide, that isn't looking for simplistic solutions and scapegoating, but looks for us buckling down and figuring out, how do we make things work for the next generation?" Well, Obama said that in January of 2016. And he was being asked in an interview, actually by Matt Lauer, sort of strange given what has come of Matt Lauer since, but he was asked whether he felt responsible for Trump's rise, and the way that he dismissed that was by saying, "The message that Donald Trump's putting out has had adherents a lot of times during the course of our history. You know, talk to me if he wins. Then we'll have a conversation about how responsible I feel about it." So leaving Obama's responsibility out of it, this idea that it never seemed like it could work. That Obama, who fancies himself a person who really deeply understands what's in people's hearts and how our politics goes, and who obviously takes a pretty high level of skill to get elected president twice, he has that knowledge. But that he and everybody else thought that the Trump campaign was something that didn't work, that would speak not to where people really were, that the way that Donald Trump has gone about his entry into political life would not be something that would find resonance. Well, Obama has not picked up that conversation himself since. I have asked. And I know I'm not the only person who's asked for him to talk about it, but he has not engaged. So these days, as I said, what I do is run around the country talking to the people who are running for president, who are trying to counter what is coming from Donald Trump. More than ever before, there are more candidates than ever before, and amazingly, given how many of them there are, no two are really the same. There are lots of overlaps, and they fall in totally different ways, but it's the first time that we're seeing there have ever been multiple women running for president, multiple African-American candidates, multiple young people, multiple old people, multiple whatever it is. And they are making their way around quite a bit. 3 weeks ago, I was on a single day in Northeast Iowa with Beto O'Rourke, Cory Booker, and Amy Klobuchar. Last Saturday, in one day, I went from Pete Buttigieg to Kirsten Gillibrand to Michael Bennet to Cory Booker. All of them are, within 30 minutes of each other. That's the kind of state of the race that we're in now. I'm not the person that a person should turn to ask what a candidate should do or shouldn't do. First of all, I'm a reporter. That's not my job. But second of all, anyone who tells you that they know how this is going to go or what will work or what won't is either lying to you or delusional. So we're going to have a lot of guessing and luck involved. I've compared this to they all have their own theories of the race, and it's like some people are playing chess, and some people are playing checkers, and some people are playing poker, and some people are playing Parcheesi, and then we'll know sometime probably in November of 2020 whether this worked and whether that theory, it turned out that you needed to be playing Parcheesi to win the presidential election. But I can tell you now from what I'm seeing and how people are responding, what seems to be working. What Donald Trump tapped into was a level of hurt and anxiety in America that was very real. It was deeper and more widespread than anyone realized was there. And he tapped into it more effectively than anyone realized was happening. And I can tell you 3 years later, the hurt and the anxiety is just as real. People don't feel like they're any better off. They don't feel like the bills have gotten easier to pay or the playing field is more level. The pain is intense. And I think we all know the anger that comes with that pain is intense too. And it's not just among people who voted for Trump. I think it's fair to say that if you're sitting here on a Wednesday evening at a lecture hosted by a book collection on the campus of the University of Pennsylvania, you probably don't feel as much of that pain and anger yourself. But whether it's about flat wages or student loans or opioid addiction or towns that are being hollowed out, it's there. And the response is not varying too much. Some people want the kind of revolution that Bernie Sanders is pitching. That really is not too different from the Trump argument, though obviously in execution it would be very different. That everything that's been built up is wrong and we need a Noah-type flood to wash everything away and start over. That no one has been honest in dealing with anyone. Some people want to take those same sorts of ideas and scale it back a degree and land on Elizabeth Warren, or some see that there needs to be more coming together. They land on Cory Booker or maybe Beto O'Rourke or Pete Buttigieg. Some seeing as needing a more head-on confrontation, so they go to Kamala Harris, or they feel like maybe we just need to take a breath and retrace our steps and figure out where things forked off to where we are, and that's why they want Joe Biden. I could go on, but again, if I tick through all the candidates, we'd be here all night. Part of the mistake that just about everyone made in 2016 was dismissing the anger, talking about how it was misplaced or wasn't as big a deal. And you know what happens to people who are hurting and angry when they're told that they're angry at the wrong thing or that their anger isn't right or just about them and not something that they should be feeling? Well, it doesn't make them less angry or less in pain or less inclined to believe the people who speak to that anger and speak to that pain. And the Democrats who are breaking through so far, and again, it's early, I'd argue, are the ones who right now, and the ones who are breaking through right now and look like they will continue to break through, are the ones who are trying to speak to that anger and transmute it, try to turn it into the kind of change they're pitching, the worldviews that they're running on. But that's harder. Anger toward no, anger toward hate is natural. It's human. Anger toward yes, toward coming together is hard. But again, that anger and the pain is where paranoia can fester. And there are politicians who will always move to take advantage of it. That space is in the people who all manage what seems like cognitive dissonance of somehow voting for both Barack Obama and for Donald Trump. But that space is also in all the people who didn't vote in 2016 because they felt left out for one reason or another. And that space, I think let's face it, is in all of us in some level, even if you think Trump is terrible, or your life has gone well enough that you've never worried about how to get a bill paid or about getting passed over for something you felt like you'd earned. What we know from Dreyfus, though, is how much can be kicked up and how many years can be shaped by the legacy of a breaking point event. And not to diminish the focus of this collection, but that was just one trial, one man at the center of it. What's going on now is all over the country and has influenced politics all over the world. So whether you voted for Trump or you didn't, whether you're hoping he's reelected or not, whether he is reelected or not, what happened in the last few years will be with America for a very long time. And paranoia, of course, won't stay partisan. It's not just the territory of Donald Trump. That suspicion of everything, everywhere, that has permeated our lives, and to be clear, Trump exacerbates, but has deeper roots in all of our institutions getting caught in the failings and their creakiness. That's going to be with us. We live at a time with more access to information than ever before in human history, and the disinformation continues. Think about how amazing it was, just from a technological standpoint, that when Notre Dame was on fire the other day, we could, from all over the world, sit in our chairs and watch it live from however many angles we wanted, including from any number of people reaching into their pockets and streaming the spire falling from their phones. We could look up the history of the rose window or Quasimodo references. But at the same time, there were people going on television speculating that it might be arson, speculating who might be responsible for that arson. It's from this same part of the mind that the idea that climate change is a hoax has seeped in, but also that there are solutions in these easy slogans that speak to our emotions, whether it's build that wall or, again, Green New Deal, each of which very quickly became a necessary position for Republicans or for Democrats. It's from that same place it gets people tweeting at me when I write a story that has not such great stuff about a candidate or some other candidate, and they say that I must be working for a candidate, or that I'm biased towards a candidate or against a candidate, or they must be lying, or I must be stupid. That's where it lands. So look, I'm a journalist. I'm biased toward facts and living in facts. That can be a dangerous bias these days. I'm aware that journalism doesn't have the highest levels of trust or support at the moment, and I attribute that in part to mistakes that both individual reporters and their organizations have made, but also to people who see things that they don't believe or they don't want to believe, and so get angry when they see those things reported and assume it must be fake or slanted. The question that I sometimes get, including on Monday afternoon from a group of high school seniors who are trying to figure out why I do this with my life, is why? The answer has a few levels to it, but especially at this moment, it's because I believe that the solution to misinformation and confusion isn't just screaming about it online or burying your head in the sand, but getting out and getting as much actual information and playing an active role in making sure things are in the conversation that can get lost in politics that tends toward the easy anger and emotion, that treats politics as a game, where there are feuds and targets and slams and not major disagreements about the biggest questions of our time. We're in a divided, polarized country. That's what we hear all the time. But here's one thing that I think everybody can agree about. No one is happy about where things are now. No one wakes up every morning thinking things are great and that the country and the world is where you want it to be. That includes every Democrat in this room and every Republican in this room and everyone else. It includes President Trump and Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell, even though those three have very different politics about just about everything else. We can disagree about what exactly is wrong and what the prescription is to fix it, but again, we all agree that a lot is wrong. And that's why the 2020 election is so important. The 2016, I'd say, teed up the choices. Now America gets to make one of those choices. In the next year and a half, we'll see how much that choice is determined based on what's actually at stake and how much is determined based on the paranoia. And I guess it's up to me, but it's also up to you, everybody else, to see how we engage on this and what we let ourselves get drawn into. And I should say, part of the wonder of the internet is that we can see how many people read each story and how long they spend on each story. So we can tell when people are tending towards the paranoia. So I call on all of you to go for the facts. But on that light note, let me stop and try to take your questions. Yeah, are we doing, I don't know if I can just call on people. Yeah. Oh, is there a mic?
Yep.
Great.
Sir, yep. Thank you very much. In the vignettes you ran down about Trump's manipulations and the Democrats' responses, you give the media a pretty passive role.
Oh, no, I don't mean that to be.
Okay.
Yeah.
It seems to, but in your in your very last remark about noting, what articles I read and how long I stay on it, that really I think gets to it, doesn't it? That there's a market for these
Oh,
very short time horizon, snappy horse race type coverage, as opposed to the issues that really downstream are going to have meaning in our lives. And so, what is the profession of journalism doing to kind of reconstitute itself? I know that's a big question, but shouldn't there be that going on as well?
I think there is that going on, and it's a complicated question. And this is talking about what the media is doing is always very complicated because the media ranges from me to anybody on cable news to anybody who worked for a slanted website one way or the other to, I don't know, anybody who is posting things. The media just doesn't mean anything. To most people, it ends up meaning cable news. But there has been a lot of soul searching in the world of journalism since 2016. Sometimes it's not enough, or it's not the right kind of soul searching. It is incumbent on all of us to do what we can to think about this. Look, the biggest example of where, clear example of where I think reporters got it wrong was in engaging on WikiLeaks in the way that we did, and with what we know of what it was, the stolen emails that were part of a disinformation campaign meant to disrupt our elections pushed by a foreign power. That is something that at the time totally played off of reporters' instincts to get things that weren't meant to be public and make them public. And I think there's some people who have looked at that since and said, I can't believe we fell for this. And there's some people who continue to go back through those emails and look for things. Just the other day, yesterday, the New York Times quoted a bunch of emails that were from WikiLeaks still, and that led to a lot of questions of how have we not changed how we approach that? But your question was also about the horse race coverage, and yeah, look, people will eat it up, and it's always alluring for a reporter to write things that are going to get read a lot or watched a lot, and then it does come on each of the reporters, and that's why I say it's definitely on me and each one of us to make sure that we're thinking about what we put out there. Again, the example of what happened with Cory Booker and me is because I made an error in asking the question, and thankfully for me, I did not make the error all the way. But sometimes on the campaign trail, things can move very quickly, and again, that also is how things can get messed up.
If I weren't paranoid before I came in here, I would be. Now, about the news, I had other questions, but since you're talking about news and reporters, it seems to me what's scary is that each of us are reading the newspapers or listening to the radio and the media that supports our point of view. So I don't know how you change the minds of people who are listening to Fox News or to Mercer newspapers or to Rush Limbaugh. I mean, it's as if we've got tribal newspapers and media, and I don't know how we get two different sets of news. I don't know what in the world can reporters or media do about that.
Well, I mean, one thing that I think it's interesting to keep in mind is that the whole idea of objective or non-biased journalism was a pretty 20th century creation, right? For most of the time that there was a press in the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries, it was whichever party or group that you were with. But the world's changed, and here we are again, and yeah, it is it is very easy. Again, I think when you see the polls that show that there's not a lot of faith in the media, what I think that some of that is because if I write something that you don't agree with, you don't want to believe is true, then you don't have a lot of faith in me, right? Even if it is true. It happens a lot. And so it becomes about reporters doing everything that we can to get as deep into finding out what's happening and exposing things through not just supposition, but really going and talking to as many people as we can. And that's, I was working on a story that published today about Bernie Sanders, and again, I have 2 young kids and try not to leave them and my wife more than I have to, but I knew that I had to go to a rally to do it, so I threw myself on a plane to Pittsburgh on Sunday afternoon and was in Pittsburgh for like 7 hours because that's part of what the job has to be, to get as many people talking to you and get as much information as possible. There are too many reporters, I think, still who treat this as like a fun game. And there's a lot of fun in this. To be a reporter, it can be great, but it's also a responsibility of how we're approaching it.
Thanks, and thanks for the great talk. I suppose maybe my question is a little bit of a kind of questioning the premise point, but I guess just sort of thinking about some of your remarks, particularly the sort of last third or so, I guess I sort of started to wonder if maybe there is some risk, though, of kind of overstating the impact that kind of Trump and the years since the 2016 election has had. And I say that just sort of thinking back to, this was, after all, like 70,000 votes over 3 states. Every year, the demography gets less and less favorable. Young people are more and more radicalized against Republican sort of ideology. So I guess I just maybe invite you to kind of maybe say something about, is there some sense in which, we all, I think, live in this kind of universe of politics and things like that. But if we sort of step outside that, abstract it a little bit to the country at large, could we envision that, not that this sort of event ever goes away or that the kind of scar totally heals, but, are we at some risk of kind of overstating the impact of the sort of Trump revolution?
So look, you're right. It's 70. I think it was actually 90,000 votes when you put it, but it's not a lot. And 3 states went the other way. Then, right? I think the question maybe to think about, though, is how did it get to be that close? How is it that it was about 90,000 votes, or people not turning out to vote, right? My favorite number, when I think about what happened in 2016, is actually that in Michigan, Trump won with fewer votes in Michigan than George Bush got in 2004 when he lost Michigan. So this is also about people who just didn't turn out to vote. It's not just about Trump. It's about institutions that have been exposed and all over the place, right? But now you have somebody who is speaking for the country and with the biggest and most effective media presence that we've ever really seen, that tries to make us doubt everything, and so he exacerbates those things. And when you put that together with, look, 50 years ago, nobody would have thought that you'd question Catholic priests, right? They were just good people, right? But now we see that there were a lot of reasons to question what was happening, right? This goes throughout whatever it may be. And so Trump is a symptom of what that is, but has now exacerbated that in a big way. Does that answer your question a little bit? Yeah.
Hi, Isaac. Just a question. You spoke earlier about the real pain that Americans feel and that these are real issues out there. And so here we are at the beginning of a presidential campaign. And what I detect already is that Democrats are imposing on themselves litmus tests that have nothing to do with the reality of what Americans are feeling. So here you have Cory Booker and a whole bunch of other Democratic candidates latching on to reparations as a measure of their loyalty to the American public. And I just wonder politically how that is going to play, because you can just see Donald just sitting there licking his lips when this is how the Democrats are going to, and Obama talked about the circular firing squad. This is the first example. And how pure do the Democrats have to be before they get serious about confronting Donald Trump in the election?
Well, yeah, and look, some of that is what he'll throw out there, and with that Omar video is definitely part of it. Like, look what he can do. He can make all the Democrats stand up and defend a congresswoman who has made herself problematic on a number of issues that speak to where a lot of Democrats are. There was a great analysis that ran in the New York Times last week about what people talk about on Twitter versus what they talk about, what like people who are not on Twitter talk about, and how different those things are. The upshot is the sort of the polling and analysis section of the Times that did that, and you should all check it out. This is a real thing. There are things that seem like to the very online, very engaged, activist part of the party that sits on Twitter and wants to know, okay, are you for the Green New Deal? Are you for packing the court? Are you for reparations? And most people just don't engage on that. But what they do want to hear about is how are you going to make my life better? And I'll tell you, the Mueller report is going to come out in the morning, and again, I have no idea what's in it. I think some people will find some things that verify what they always knew all along, and other people will find other things that verify what they knew all along. It is not, I am at events with candidates all the time, and Russia and the Mueller report rarely come up. And so part of what the candidates are trying to surf here is how they deal with what they are being pressured into through Twitter or the activist parts, and not having that be a big part of what they think about and what they talk about, because that is just not what the voters, most voters don't care that much about whether you think that there should be 9 justices on the Supreme Court or like 12 with a rotating. It's not where they are. It's what about the fact that I can't make my mortgage payments, or and that is where the candidates are directing themselves. But I think you're right. Like, part of what we will see potentially is them getting sandbagged with these decisions that then can be used against them when they're trying to put themselves forward to the general electorate. Now, the counterpoint to all this is Joe Biden, at least at the moment, right? And Biden, who looks like he is going to run. We'll find out. He believes very much that he doesn't have to care about the fact that he's not with it, with the Twitter Democratic crowd, that it doesn't matter that he has a record that, of course, goes back to when he was first elected in 1972, that is out of sync with where the party is on a lot of issues, whether it's that he was for busing or some of the financial regulation laws, that he was, whatever it may be. It's a lot over 30 plus years in the Senate. And there are, if you polled the Democrats on Twitter, they'd say Biden has no chance. But if you look at the polls that are being done of the voters, he is leading in the polls, at least for the moment. And one of the questions that we will see answered, if and when he gets in, is whether, when people look at him and look at, rather than the idea of him, whether his poll numbers go up or stay the same or go down.
With the divisiveness in this country, how do you see the country should the Democrats win?
You know, I think it really does depend on which Democrat we're talking about. To just take the two people who are leading at the polls currently, Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders would be very different presidents, right? Cory Booker would be a very different president from either of them. Kamala Harris would be a very different, Elizabeth Warren, just run through the list, right? Pete Buttigieg would be a very different president, right? So some of it is that, and some of it is the question of how you move forward, what you decide to focus on. In September, I was talking to John Kerry, and I said to him, I mean, you have to admit, Mr. Secretary, that the State Department now is getting reformed in a real way. I mean, I know you don't like what's happening, but it's like there are changes, and then maybe if a Democrat wins in 2020, you can decide what you want the State Department to actually look like. And he said, well, of course, we did our reports. We had an 80-page summary of our report, and looked at them, and none of that really took effect in a massive way. It was incremental changes, right? And what it will be for any Democrat who wins, if the Democrat wins, is to decide what should be now, because it's like after a forest fire, right? Like you have to decide how to rebuild, or let's not do a forest fire. There's an example in our news, right? Like, what are they going to do with Notre Dame now, right? Like, do they build the roof exactly as it was and cut down the trees from Versailles the way that they've been, or do they build something different? Every part of the government is going to face that question, right? If a Democrat comes in, then the question that that Democrat will get every day is, okay, well, would you like to focus on the State Department or on the Health Department, on housing or on defense, right? And how you do that. It is going to be a massive undertaking for a Democrat to try to decide what to change back or what to put into a new direction. And by the way, if Trump wins again, then we will see bigger decisions, I think, about the future of those departments happening also. And we'll see that there are, I don't remember, dozens of top-level jobs at the State Department that just were never filled by the president. He will then get to see, if he's reelected, do those jobs just no longer exist, right? Or do you then take advantage of refashioning the State Department in some other way? So it's very much an open question.
Thank you for your talk. I just wanted to see what you thought about this. It seems to me in the Dreyfus France context, and continuing anywhere, basically, there's always a thread between the conservative/reactionary side and the liberal progressive side. Mm-hmm. And so the question that, in the Dreyfus period was that, you had the Bonapartists and the monarchists and the Catholic Church on one side of the equation, and you had Zola and the socialists and everybody Popular Front on the other side, and there was that tension around the change that you were talking about. Mm-hmm. In America, we have pretty much the same thing, even though a lot of people don't see it or don't say it. But I was out in Missouri and Southern Illinois a couple of summers ago, summer 17, and you can tell, and I'm sure that's what I wanted to ask you, that you can tell that there is that conservative, reactionary part of the white culture, or whatever you want to call it, in America that is very, very strong mm-hmm. and combative. And you have here in Philadelphia and in New York and wherever in the coast, the other side also very combative. And so my question to you is whether Biden can do the thread to get the strands from the intensity of each side and just take the whole thing.
Well, if he does run, then that's what he's hoping that he can do. But I don't know. Let me put it to you this way. There are at least 18 people who have been expecting him to run, who are running anyway, who think that they will be able to tap into something very different in where the party is and where the country is. There is there is some data that would lead you to believe that Joe Biden would be a very strong candidate, and there's some that would lead you to believe that it's mostly a story that we've told ourselves. I did an article a few weeks ago that looked into this idea that Joe Biden can win the white working class, right? Well, you know, Joe Biden has never won an election outside of Delaware. Right? When he feels like he deserves a piece of the credit for Obama's victories in 2008, especially in 2012, but most people were voting for Barack Obama or against Barack Obama. And a number of the people who worked on the Obama campaign I talked to for the article said that they felt like he had been really crucial in helping win states. And I said to them, can you tell me what state you wouldn't have won if he hadn't been on the ticket? And they said, well, that's hard to say. So that's part of the question. But the other thing that is going on in the Democratic Party overall right now is this question of whether there is a getting back the white working class voters, or whether there's been a fundamental shift that's happened here. And I talked about the Michigan numbers a few minutes ago. Trump won in Michigan by 10,706 votes. I think that's the count. Hillary Clinton got 75,000 fewer votes in Wayne County than Obama did in 2012, right? So Wayne County is around Detroit. That's not the white working class. That's African-American working class, right? But not the obsession that we've had, a lot of us, in thinking, well, what these white working class voters will determine what happens, who wins the election. If Hillary Clinton had been able to speak to these voters who were not there for her, then she would have won Michigan. In the election last year in Wisconsin, Scott Walker lost because around Milwaukee there was a surge of voters for the Democratic candidates. And you see all around the country, the voter turnout in the midterms for the Democrats included a lot of people who were new voters, certainly new voters to midterm elections. So one of the issues that we're about to see litigated is whether this is about getting back voters who have drifted, or whether it's about turning on new voters. We'll see that play out in the primary a little bit, but also very much in the general election. And so that's why, look, as someone who, at least demographically, is very different from Joe Biden, Kamala Harris thinks that she has a very clear way through to winning. Or Pete Buttigieg, who, again, very different demographically than either of them. They look at this and they say, look, that's my path. And it's just as strong, if not stronger.
Thank you very much for your thoughtful comments today, especially the discussion about paranoia, because I think there's been more discussion of that lately. I think it was a David Brooks that said, everybody take a deep breath or something. I have just an aside plus a question. The aside is to learn that Lincoln actually paid reparations to voters in Washington who lost a slave. He paid them $300, and that kind of time's money, which I found fascinating. It was either in the Times or the Post. So I'm not necessarily crazy about the reparations idea as a trigger, because I think it could hurt us in the election, but I thought it was interesting that it was paid, but it was paid to white slave voters.
I don't know anything about that, I'm sorry.
One of the two major papers today. Okay. Anyway, my question is this. I'm really curious what you think about the attention given to the four significant women candidates who are running. My own sense is they're not getting the same shot. It's kind of like the pay equity thing. We get less on the dollar. Well, in a way, I feel that they're getting less on the campaign trail too, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I don't know that that is true. And that, by the way, there are more than 4 women running, right? So, right? There are 4 female senators, right? And then there's Tulsi Gabbard, the congresswoman from Hawaii, and Marianne Williamson, who self-help author. But let me actually take the example of Marianne Williamson. It's just because most people don't think that she is like a really serious candidate for the presidency. Is that because she's a woman, or is that because she's a self-help author who talks about spirituality and has never really been involved in politics before? Those are so that's part of what's happening here. You see the field so far of the top fundraisers, 3 of them were women. Harris, Warren, and Klobuchar. Harris, Klobuchar, and Warren, I should say, in order, for the first quarter. They've all been kind of in the same kind of space in the polls, in 3rd or 4th place. And I think that they have been getting, for the most part, coverage that matches where they are. But there are issues of bias that certainly come through. There was a great column in the Washington Post earlier this week that talked, that was reflecting on Beto O'Rourke and Pete Buttigieg, and saying that for men, it's a question of ambition, and for women, it's a question of experience. And I think that is true, right? There is certainly no way that a 3-term congresswoman who had lost a Senate race and then spent 3 months kind of finding herself and driving around would have gotten the same reaction that Beto O'Rourke did. But it's been about a month, 5 weeks since he got into the race, and some of that has kind of caught up with him. So it's hard to judge the coverage by sort of day by day. And I think some of this, again, there are things that we all need to do better in the journalism side of it, but also let's see how it looks when it's all said and done. But there is no question that there are different ways that people are being received.
Thank you also for being here and for all of your comments. I guess this is going to be an obvious question, but I'm just interested to see how you would frame a response. So I don't really get, I am one of those, I guess, admittedly tribal people. I didn't think I was, but when I see how many people just don't care what kind of person, what kind of morals, what kind of things he did, and I get, people will say, well, who cares about his personal life and what he's done, and who cares that he, lies basically anytime he speaks, and that you can prove it by just going back and getting other footage. Who cares, right? But I guess and the whole business about his base, like he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and all that. But I guess what I don't get are the people who are not just interested in having a rebel rouser and just someone to shake up Washington and get rid of everything. But I'm interested in those people who really believed that he would be better, and that they see, maybe they voted for him because they wanted coal reinstate, and that hasn't happened. And maybe they voted for him because they thought he would have a better health care, and that hasn't happened. And maybe they voted for him because they thought, he promised everyone would get better tax thank you, but that hasn't happened. So I guess where is the the old Music Man, let's point to the flim flam guy? Like why isn't that happening among those people who aren't necessarily his core base, where he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue, but the people that really thought he would make a difference? And he's been in office however many days, and none of those things have come to pass. And what is he going to do? I mean, he's already saying, well, he won't be able to deliver the health care until after 2020, but you have to believe in him again for that to happen. Like, why are people buying this for so long?
There was a key moment in the first debate between Hillary Clinton and Trump when it was early out in the debate, when she was going after him for not paying his taxes and for using Chinese steel, and why didn't he use American steel, and she just eviscerated him, it seemed like. And he looked at her, and paraphrasing here, and he said, well, you were there for 25 years. You were setting the rules. If you didn't want me to do this, then you should have changed the rules. And why should we believe you're going to do something different? You're there now. And I think that really got at the essence of the Trump campaign. This feeling that the way things were was not working for a lot of people. And it was not that they were unaware of Trump's character. Some of them are entertained by Trump's character, but even the ones who say, I don't really like it, they went in with fuller knowledge than I think maybe you would have guessed of that, and said, but I just want it to all change. This wasn't working for me, and he's speaking for me, he's fighting for me, and they connect with that. And so that maybe is a window into some of it. Well, I mean, they feel like he's fighting and that he's being stopped by Democrats and by the media and by all the forces against him. This is part of why the president talks about the deep state a lot, because it explains in the story of, he would make the government do this stuff, but the government is fighting him, and you don't even see where the government is fighting him. It's there, right? And look, it's also why some people think that the best thing that could have ever happened for Donald Trump's reelection is Nancy Pelosi becoming Speaker of the House and the Democrats winning the majority, because then it provides a foil. I don't know if that's true, but there is that theory. Yeah.
We have one final question. I'd like to ask you, are any of the Democratic candidates looking at the economy stupid? Because for someone who's kind of in the middle class, I mean, that resonates. And I'm talking about any ethnic, because where I work, it's all race, ethnic. If you're middle class, you're so pissed because everybody's working harder, everybody's working overtime to try and get to the same place that they were so they can pay for their kids' college and pay the mortgage, and now, and now the tax, forget about it. Everybody's bitching about that. Everybody, because they wanted to go on vacation and now they can't.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that people doing their taxes in the last couple of weeks has made things a little bit more real for them. I think most of the candidates are speaking about the economic plan, things that they would do to influence the economy one way or the other, things that they would do to influence people's personal economic situation one way or the other. And again, it's about sort of getting through the haze. But you've had significant proposals come out of Elizabeth Warren, of Bernie Sanders. Most of the ones that go at the root of the economy are actually from Warren at this point, but also from some of the other candidates. Kamala Harris talked about raising teacher pay. Cory Booker has this idea that they call baby bonds, that it would be an investment when everybody would get it. And then like other plans that are being developed. And some of this is that it is April. And some of it is that there's a feeling among several of the candidates, including something that O'Rourke has talked about and that Buttigieg has talked about, of like, this is about setting a values statement that is not, so Buttigieg said to me when I saw him in New Hampshire the weekend before last, that he'll have an economic plan. He said, when I was running for mayor, I was the only candidate who wrote an economic development plan. He said, nobody read it. I know it, but it made a big difference to people to know that there was something there. And so that was kind of his explanation for why he hasn't led with the specifics of the policy, but that any Democrat would move things in a different direction. But it's not true that they would move things in the same direction at all.